This is the Self-Taught or Not podcast with
Dylan Israel
and Eric Hanchett, where we teach you the do's and don'ts of software development from two software development professionals, one self-taught and one not. Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about open source software. We're going to define what open source is. We're going to talk about a little bit of the history, and then talk about what it means to us, as web developers, as software developers, and how we use it day to day, and our thoughts about it. So what do you think, Dylan?
So open source a lot of times has really, in my mind, changed the world and changed how we see things. And it's really a concept that has taken off, I would say, in the last 10, 15 years. And it's revolutionized the world which is a very dramatic thing to say, but it really has if you start thinking about all the items that have impacted your lives daily.
Yeah, it's just almost a ton of software, a ton of frameworks. A lot of things we use day to day in our jobs were created for free in some ways. So let's go back in time first and talk about where open source software came from and a little brief history. So first, I'm pulling some of this facts from Wikipedia, so if you want to fact check me, please check Wikipedia. And I've also did a little research in college about this. I had an assignment, so I'm bringing up some of my notes from that too. So essentially, open source software is a type of computer software in which source code is released under a license in which the copyright holder grants users the rights to study, change, and distribute the software to anyone for any purpose. Open source software may be developed in collaboration in public manner. There's a lot of different examples of open source software, and usually it's rooted in non-commercial kind of ways of giving away something for free. But we'll come back to that free part in a second because there's a few caveats there. One interesting tidbit is that open source software has really been around for a long time. In the 70s, when we didn't have the internet as we know it today, but we did have parts of these academic universities that had software, and there was a version of, I believe it's called NSFNet. There was different versions of the internet back then, and people would share software. But really, the idea of open source didn't start until like the early 80s, I would say. Richard Stallman in 1983 created the GNU operating system. It's GNU, but it's pronounced GNU. And he created something called the Free Software Foundation. At least he did a little bit after that. And then there's other people you may hear in history that created, that kind of coined the phrase open source and what we know of it as today. There's a famous book called The Cathedral the Bazaar, which was a book written by Eric S. Raymond. And in that, he described two ways of kind of software development. There's the cathedral model, which is mostly like the closed source model that we have, where a cathedral, you can only let certain people in. It's an exclusive group. And then the bazaar model, which is the co-developed in the internet via in the public. So, and then Eric S. Raymond credits Linus Torvalds, who was the original creator of Linux, the Linux kernel, that is, and Git, by the way, as well. He's a Finnish developer. As really doing this out in the open. So he created Linux, I believe, in the days where people were using Usenet and messaging boards to communicate about their software, and he released all the source code online, and people were contributing to it. Now there's something called the Lioness Law, which is given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. So the idea is if we have enough people and the source code's out there, that we're going to find more bugs because people can see the source code.
Yeah, I mean, anytime I don't know if you guys have ever worked on an app that didn't have users and then did have users. Very quickly, the Linus Law is proven correct, as I have seen time and time again. You start seeing things that you're like, you look at it and go, why would they do it? Why would they do that? Why would the users actually do that? Your mind is blown. But yeah, it's been, our boy Torvalds, killing it with Linux and Git. Like, when can I get a resume like that? Like that?
Yeah, he's pretty remarkable. He's done a lot of stuff. There is I mentioned earlier about Richard Stallman, and he created the GNU operating system. He's also the founder of the Free Software Foundation, or one of the founders. And there was actually, and this used to be a bigger thing like years ago, but there was an idea that there's differences between open source and free software. So Richard Stallman focused on the idea that software should be free, as in freedom or speech. So if you ever talk to, I don't know if you ever talked to an old graybeard developer who's been in the industry for a while, you may have heard this term like free as in software, not free as in beer. Have you heard that, Dylan?
No.
Well, the idea is that if someone gives you a beer, that's like free as in beer. Like, cool, that's like a gift. Okay. And you can make an analogy, like similarly, like Microsoft gave us Internet Explorer for free. We got it as a gift. You don't have to pay for it. You got it.
Nothing like getting cancer for free.
Exactly. However, free as in freedom or free as in speech gives you like the liberty to make changes. You don't just get the beer, but you would almost get like the recipe for the beer, the ability to change it. So in software, when you talk about free as in freedom, not as in beer, they're really saying that you are getting something that you have the liberty to change and to update and to see how it actually works, which is kind of a different concept. And really that is what the Free Software Foundation is all about. While the open source movement is more focused, is advocating wanting to focus on the practical benefits of using open source software that would appeal more to businesses rather than ethics and morals. But at the end of the day, it's just different types of messaging. I believe both open source software and the Free Software Foundation have both the same focus, and that is the ability to give people more liberties with the software that they have, and that they can make changes without being sued, that they can make updates, and that they have some ownership of it.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting point, and one that I didn't really consider. I know oftentimes when I say open source, I often mean like, oh yeah, projects you can work on, but I'm also talking maybe incorrectly about free software where they're like, oh hey, we're building this product and we're giving it away for free, which is a very common business model in nowadays, where Gary Vee I think says it best, where like to be successful, just give it away for free and then charge the top 3% of your clients for a premium version, right? Like in social media, YouTube, part of all of our success is just putting out content for free and gaining the audience. And it's not something I actually considered about the difference between free and open source.
Yeah, so you could definitely have a product that's free, but not necessarily open source. And so the top 4 reasons why you may want to go with open source is that it has a lower cost. It should have better security because, if you have a lot of people looking at the source code, they should be able to find bugs. Going back to the Linus Law, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. It should become evident where the bugs are if you have a lot of people looking at it, and security should be not as much of a concern. There's no vendor lock-in, so typically when you work with large companies and you buy their software, you're locked into that software, into that ecosystem. There's no changing it. Sometimes you have contracts that last for months, if not years. And you should make better quality software. And this is certainly debatable because we've all worked in closed loop software, closed source software, and I would think that Windows 10 is pretty good. Like, it's closed source, that I can't get the quality. I can't get the source code, but I think the quality is pretty high. Is it higher or lower than, I don't know, Ubuntu Linux, which is based on the Linux kernel and open source? No, that's debatable.
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on what your goal is, right? And I think it's worth mentioning that just because software is open source or free doesn't, and you support that. So like I'm very pro like software should be free, but it doesn't mean that I think everything shouldn't cost something, because I do think these free software is that people are putting time, effort, and energy, and they should have a way to monetize it. Otherwise, we're not going to get any better quality. Otherwise, we're not going to, it's unfair to just think that people are going to put their hours in again and again into something without getting something out to pay their livelihoods.
That's a good point. I mean, let's talk about money a little bit in open source, because I think this is confusing to a lot of people. And I mean, we think about something that's free or open source, then we instantly think, well, why would someone do that? Why would like someone spend hours and hours, or these organizations that have dozens of people contributing, why would they do it for free? And there's definitely different motivations why people contribute to open source software. And some people just like the idea of being in a community. Some people truly want to give back. But open source doesn't necessarily mean there's no money involved. There's plenty of open source projects that make a lot of money. For example, I would say almost any popular open source project, they're, including myself, I've done this, have written books on that said framework or open source project to make money. And sometimes the contributors who've made the products write books. And that's a great way to make money. You can actually, I mentioned free software, but depending on the terms of the open source project, so if you create an open source project, you can give it a license. And there's these different licenses. You may have heard of the GPL or GNU or the other ones, and all of them have different stipulations. But a lot of them allow you to charge. You can simply take an open source product and then charge people for it. But there might be a caveat that the source code still has to be free. So, for example, Ghost is a blogging platform. The code is absolutely free for anyone to download, but they charge for it because they offer a service. So if you want your hosting site for a blog, for your Ghost site, they offer that service. And same thing for WordPress. WordPress is built on an open source project. You can download the source code, you can become a contributor, but people make tons of money off of WordPress, off the plugins, off of hosting, off of helping people install it. There's just lots of ways that people make money off of that.
A lot of these just start as like any other project or any other idea or business of, hey, I see a need for something, and oftentimes it's in their own work. Like, I need something, it's not out there, so I'm just gonna build that shit. And like one company I've always liked the idea of is a company called Tidelift, which they essentially from stats that they've gathered, 92% of professional applications use some version of open source to deliver that product. And so like their business model is all about like, hey, get companies to send money, and based off what is literally in their repos, they then send money to these people who are part of their platform to maintain that, to continue to build better versions of the stuff that they use.
I really like that. I know some large companies do something like that. Like I remember, I think it's Stack Overflow, or it was another company. They're built on some open source software, and every year they give 10% of their profits to the projects that they use. So a lot of times companies use a lot of different open source projects. I would say where you work, Dylan, probably they do. I do too. So a lot of times they'll feel the need to give back, and they'll go ahead and pay and donate money. Another really cool thing that I've seen, this seems to happen a lot, is, well, there's a couple things. Evan Yu is the project maintainer of Vue.js. And one way he is able to make money is he quit his full-time job, and he has a Patreon. And if you donate money to him, you can be on his Patreon list. And then he has been able to make so much money off of Patreon that he doesn't work anymore. He just works full-time on Vue. Now, one other thing he makes it even better is that if you donate to his Patreon, you can get your logo on the front page of Vue.js.com of some of the projects that are under the Vue.js flagship of products. That's probably not the right way to say it, but all the different libraries and things that make up Vue.js. So by donating to him, you're supporting Vue, but you're also supporting Evan, and you can get some free advertising out of it too. And I've seen this sponsorship model happen a lot. I was just looking at a couple of Vue component libraries like Vuetify and Quasar, and they have tons of advertising on their web pages. If you go to them, they have Vue School doing free videos for them for advertising. They have sponsorships at the top. They have premium support. So these are all open source projects. So if you get stuck, you can pay their developers to come in and fix it for you. So that's another way of people in these open source projects are making money.
Yeah.
One other to round this up, just so there's a ton of companies that rely, almost exclusively on open source software. For a long time, reddit.com was an open source forum software. They've actually since closed sourced it, I think a year or two ago. But for a long time, you could download Reddit's full source code and create your own Reddit if you wanted to. Dev.to is completely open source. They're still open source, Dev.to. And so everybody, you can contribute to it. I've already mentioned Ghost and WordPress. Red Hat, basically the whole operating system is closed source, but they make a ton of money off of support, and you can get premium support packages and some of the software they offer. The Mozilla Foundation, using Firefox, of course, all the single page application frameworks, all the different libraries are all open source. So let's move on from there. What does this mean for us? So what do you think, Dylan?
There's a very practical aspect of it, is that it means that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, and we can continue delivering better products. So I'm very pro not using libraries and frameworks if you don't have to, but I'm also very pro don't spend 2 years building a rich text app if there's good solutions out there, because if there's a good solution out there, check it, verify it. It's a little trust but verify, and then utilize it. So it gives us to be able to build these very rich web applications nowadays that people expect, right? When you go to a website or a web app, you expect certain functionality, and every year that's growing.
Let me ask that's a good point there. It's definitely growing, and you kind of hinted on not trying to pull in a library for every single feature that you need. And we had a conversation, I think a couple of episodes ago, about your rant episode that you did. If you guys want to look it up in our episode list, I should really have the episode list in front of me so I can reference the episode number.
It's actually rant in the title, because I believe, because I sort of rant every episode, but this one's extra ranty.
Exactly. And so that rant episode, you essentially said that you have a problem that people that are using these libraries as crutches that can't actually do it themselves. So they can't create a modal, but they can use the component library to create that modal. And if you can't create the modal without using a library, then you are in big trouble.
Yeah, there's certain things that are exceptions, but generally speaking, that there is a subset of developers who they don't code anymore. All they do is copy and paste examples for frameworks and libraries to get things to work, and they just sort of hack it together. But that doesn't mean that you should not use component libraries. I had this question when I gave my conference talk about what, if sometimes we have to use things. Well, one way that you could sort of limit that, and we're starting getting off topic now, but one way that you can limit that is you can wrap all of these components in your own component, and that way if it changes in the application, you only have to change it in one spot, and maybe the functionality explodes based off what you imported, and they don't have that, and maybe then have to build it.
Episode 17 was the one that Dylan rants about this. I think it's good to point out, we're not going to get into deep dive into it too much, but that's certainly a concern a lot of people have, is that if you rely on it too much. That's a good idea of wrapping it around. I could see almost like you're making a facade for it. So all the interactions with the library is abstracted to the point that you easily swap it out at one point. I could see that. Well, so let me ask you this. I've worked in a few companies, and I've had companies that when we want to use open source projects, that it's like, oh, you want to use open source project? Okay, just talk to the other person in your team. Go ahead and add it. No problem. And then sometimes you don't even need to ask anybody. You just pull it in. Yeah. No one's going to say anything. And then I've been in organizations where oh my God, we have to talk to 10 people. We have to have a meeting about it. Everybody has to agree that we need it or not. How's it been in the companies you've worked at?
So generally speaking, I just do whatever the hell I want. No, but on a more serious note, typically how it works is if there's a need and that need can't be met in a timely fashion, and it has complex functionality, what I'll do is I'll make a suggestion. As maybe I'll have a spike story and say, hey, and I'll use rich text because this is an example I had. We're like, yeah, I could build the 3 pieces of functionality they want in this tiny rich text editor, but things always blow out of scope, and then you're gonna add features and this and that, and it's gonna take much longer and bugs and all that sort of stuff. So what I do is I make a recommendation, and the tech lead takes a look, gives the okay or doesn't. What I would say to people that are organizations that need 10 people, that to me sounds like the business putting their fingers into development and isn't something that they fully understand or really understand the state of open source, and maybe they shouldn't be talking about things they don't know nothing about.
So when you guys go through the recommendation, I know a couple of things I look at is like the GitHub stars. I kind of look at if the project's been abandoned or not. The last time someone is pushed a commit, last time is people actually going through the issues, or is there like 500 issues and none of them have been talked about? If there's documentation for the project, these are all really important things. I had the misfortune of working on a project where we pulled in a very complicated library right at the beginning to hook up to NGRX. And this person that put it in thought that it would be a good idea because he used a similar library in React. And after working with it the last year and a half, I completely hate it and I want to pull it out. But now it's so integrated into a bunch of different components that I'm stuck with it. So if we would have kind of had a more of a consensus and talked about it a little bit more, then I think we would have not done it. But since we were moving so quickly and it was like no one asked each other when they added in new projects, they just did it, then we ended up having to do that. And then also, should we fork it? Sometimes some organizations, if they have a mission critical piece of code or a library that they want to use, they'll fork it into their own repository and then just maintain it and then take the changes from the master and pull it in. I've heard some organizations doing that too.
Yeah, and one thing I would say when I started to really dive into the details about evaluating something is if you are using a third-party dependency, you usually can create a very quick POC to see if this is going to fit your needs and if how it's going to be. And based off the documentation, I mean, it's already built. You just have to integrate it, right? And so that is part of the review process where, hey, I looked at these 3, 4, 5 rich text editors. I narrowed it down to these 2, and I built a POC and said, this one's a pain in the ass to work in, and this one's not. And then I also go through the bugs, and I see if there's any bugs specifically related to the functionality of the tool that I'm trying to use it for.
That's a good point. Can you explain to everyone what a POC and a spike is?
Yeah, so a spike story so typically in stories and agile development, you'll have points associated with them. And you may on spike stories, but typically not. Typically spike stories are investigation stories. They are stories where you're not going to deliver any code at the end of the day, but you're going to say, hey, I'm going to spend 8 hours looking into said subject. I'm going to spend 8 hours looking into our options. And then you might come back to your team and say, this is what I got, or in this case, the tech lead, and say, this is what I'm thinking. And a POC is short for proof of concept, where you say, hey, this is the what I'm thinking, and I built this little quick thing to show you that it can do what we want it to do. And it could be, but that's the general feel of it.
I really like doing proof of concepts and spikes, especially when you get a really big task that is really complicated and you're going to have to bring in a few libraries, or you find the specific library or component library or whatever you want that works perfectly, and just having time on your schedule, on your agile schedule, like, oh cool, I get 8 hours, I get 2 days to just test this out, play around with it, see if it works for me, and then I can do like a quick presentation to someone at the end. I really like having that time in my schedule. Unfortunately, I think a lot of organizations, it's kind of like, here's what you need to do. Don't know what to do? Too bad. Make it work within the amount of points that you got and the time that frame that we have you.
And what I would say is I think that goes to 2 things. One, I think it goes to the professionalism of the developer. I think too often the developers are treated not like a professional and not like the have the mentality of I know better than you. That's why I write the code. And that's not to be an ego thing or an aggressive thing, but that's a fact thing. And then I think on the other side of it is that the business will, depending on the organization you work in, they're just go because they don't understand the cost of that. And sometimes you have to pump the brakes, and sometimes not. But I think too often developers are too fearful to say, this is how we're going to do it, and this is why. They just say, yes sir, yes ma'am, I'll do whatever you want. It's okay to say no, but not for the sake of saying no.
Yeah, having that little extra time and then being able to work with a good organization that'll give you that extra time. Although I know we're going a little bit of a tangent here, but let me ask you this. If you're a new developer and you're listening to this right now and you're like, well, every single project I get, I don't know what to do. Like, I know how to make an HTML, CSS card, but I don't know how to do the stepper function. I mean, some things that maybe a more senior developer would know how to do, but I can't tell my boss I need a code spike for everything we're doing every single sprint.
Yeah, so there's, senior dev Dylan is different than junior dev Dylan, right? And junior dev Dylan didn't know what a spike story was. But yeah, as you are leveling up, there is going to be some expectation that certain things are going to take longer. And you say, okay, your tech lead says make a modal component, don't use Angular material. You may be like, I have no idea, but you should have enough confidence that you can figure it out. And so what I would advise in that scenario is it's okay to maybe beef up your story points with the understanding of that some tasks will be more complicated for you, right? I do a lot of front end. If they're like, hey, we need you to go write these microservices that you haven't touched in 6 months or a year, I would typically give larger story points to someone who has done that. And I think as a junior developer, it's okay to do that.
All right, so let's move on. Let's take a look at, we've already talked about being careful of what type of libraries you're bringing into your project. Have you ever had to deal with bugs in an open source project? How did you deal with that, or has it mostly worked?
No, I've had to. So there's this awesome library called Excel.js, and this is something that I spent 2 months essentially creating a auto-generated template, a very complicated one, where, hey, we took our data model, you download it, it creates an Excel file, does formatting, merges cells, all that sort of stuff. So they had a bug where, depending on so specifically with the merge cell functionality, that you couldn't style it. So you had to jump through some hoops where, like, I'd style the row, then I'd style the cell, but I couldn't style the cell, then style the row. Or sometimes I'd style the row, style the cell, then I'd style the column, like, because the merge cell, and they'll say it in there, like the merge cell is something that's a little newer and causes some issues.
So what did you do to fix it? Did you put an issue, a GitHub issue on it, or did you find a workaround?
Yeah, I always put GitHub issues on anything that I'm working with, and sometimes if I see something I think I can answer, I might answer it. Or even do a PR for something to fix it. But oftentimes it's a combination of seeing if sometimes there's hacky workarounds where, like, you can sort of figure something out. And other times I went back to the business. I said, look, this one column, we're going to all left align them because I can't center align them without making this one not be right aligned. That's just, and so there's some stuff that isn't really acceptance criteria. Like in this case, they want a template that was downloadable, that had the general info in the general spots, but let's not get hung up on the small things. Now, if it's a big thing, you should have caught that in your POC, right? So in this case for the POC, I did things like put data in the cells, merge the cells, lock the cells, style the cells, but I didn't build the whole thing. I tested the main points of functionality that said, no matter, as long as they can do this, we're good.
That's a good point. Yeah. Being able to show that beforehand you did your POC, I know it's going to work, but not getting on the details. That's always the worst feeling as a developer, when you're working on something and then you find, either because of a library or the framework or something kind of a little bit beyond you, that it's not going to be exactly what product wants. And it becomes a point where you could tell your product manager, hey, I can do 99% of what you want, but this 1% is not going to be quite right because, I just can't do it, or it's going to take a totally different approach and take 20 more hours to do. I always feel like kind of bad saying that, but it happens every now and then. It's like, I simply can't do this part. And a good product manager should be like, okay, that's good enough. If it's completely different, like you can't produce the product at all, that's a different issue.
Yeah, and I think that sort of goes back to my earlier point about being able to, to me, it all comes back to honesty and communication. And honesty, whether you're saying this is how it's going to be, or honesty, whether you're just letting the team members know where you're at. And I think too often, too many developers, especially those with years of experience, it doesn't matter. I understand when you're in your first job, those years of experience are too afraid to speak up when they need help. And honestly, that gets you in more trouble down the road. I've had many contractors I've worked with that are too afraid to speak up, that they're stuck, and then they don't say anything, don't get anything done for 3 months, and then they get cut because you reach out to them, they don't say anything, and they don't reach out to you.
Yep. All right, so let's wrap this up. So it's definitely can be a thankless job working in open source. We're not going to even get into contributing to open source. I will say that if you are interested in contributing to open source projects, there's so many out there. The best way to do is go to github.com. There's probably there's a handful of websites too that help take all the different open source projects, and so you can search through them more easily. But I would say find an open source project that you're interested in and then look at their GitHub issues. Usually there's labels on them that say something like good for beginners. Look for those and then see if you can contribute. And usually the way you do it is you look for those good for beginner issues. You say, hey, I can help with this. And then you can jump in. And now but some project maintainers of open source projects will welcome new contributors, and they'll almost hold your hand. They'll help you if you have issues or problems. Others will be like, sorry, I don't have time. So it just depends. And you may want to look at other people who've contributed. And what I've seen too a lot of times is once you start looking for open source projects, everybody's looking for somebody, and there is a whole lot of flaky people. So you'll have tons of people that want to help for open source. Some of them even put messages in the GitHub issues, and then they'll just disappear. Or they'll push up one pull request and it'll be broken, and then they'll never fix it. And then there's just a handful, probably the 80-20 rule, that 20% of the people are going to be actively engaged. They're going to really help out. So if you are working an open source project, I've heard some stories where it's just a ton of work. If you are not savvy enough or if your open source project's not big enough to have the other things I mentioned earlier, was having a book or having sponsors, a lot of times there's no pay involved. So you're essentially working for free. You have to deal with volunteers, which I just mentioned, a lot of times are pretty flaky. Sometimes they're pushy. Sometimes they'll just create issues on new features that they want. Like you're just supposed to drop everything and just create a feature that they want because, they've said so. And then I've also seen some communities that are especially some of the bigger open source projects, that they're very tight knit. Like it's almost impossible to get into their inner circle to become big in the community unless you're just really actively involved with pushing pull requests, creating documentation, things like that. Anything else you want to add there, Dylan?
Yeah, I wanted to give some resources. So after all that horror story that Eric talked about,
no, it's not that bad. It's not that bad.
Yeah, no, it's so yeah, there's always going to be lazy people or people who I'm 32 and I've known people who have been flaky since I was about 5 years old. So it doesn't surprise me too much. But I did want to give some resources for those of you who are like, I'm not quite sure where to get started. And I'd also like to say that you can always go about creating your own open source project and helping other people contribute to it as a way to sort of get your toes wet. But if you go to firsttimersonly.com, a lot of great resources there that will direct you to how to get started with open source. And then there's also up-4-grabs.net, which will help you find projects that have a couple tags on them for first timers as well. So, go ahead and get your toes wet. And the worst thing that can happen is you get rejected. And I don't know. I've also been rejected since I was about 4 from numerous women in my life, so I'm okay with it. And if you're not, get used to it. But no, it'll go well. But those are some resources to get your toes wet.
One more question before we wrap this up, and I don't know if where I stand on this. Beginning developers, new guys that are just coming in the field, probably people don't even have their first development job. Do you recommend going to open source, like finding a project and trying to contribute to it?
Oh, there's plenty of brilliant people who are better developers than developers with many years of experience, and I've had the unique opportunity of mentoring them. What I would say is that at the end of the day, somebody else is going to review your code, and if you are proactive enough to go and contribute to open source, I think that's an excellent thing, because you'll ideally be exposed to developers who are better. You'll start connecting and you'll start learning. And I think that's an excellent thing to do. It should be one of the many ways that you go from an aspiring developer or a junior developer to a senior developer.
So you would still think that's just one tool out of your tool belt of things that you should do, should not create a portfolio or something like that.
Yeah, and like a lot of times when people talk about contributing to open source, and you hear like especially aspiring developers, junior developers, they think that's like the only way to get your foot in the door, sort of thing, and it's almost sort of held up on a pedestal. That's not really how I look at it. I think it's just a great way to give back to the community, and it's that community aspect that we just want. But you still have to go and learn. You still have to go and build your own stuff. You still have to go and contribute in other ways. But that could definitely be one of the ways that you do it.
All right, sounds good.
All right. And if you'd like to see this free podcast, this free software, hopefully you're at selftaughtornot.com. You can check out some of our other stuff. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you want to find more about what I'm up to, go to dylanisrael.com.
And if you want to know what I'm up to, you can check out my website at eric.video. If you haven't already, please leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And if you do, you might even be featured on our next episode. Don't forget to check out the website at selftaughtornot.com. From there, you can sign up for a mailing list where we give away free courses and a bunch of cool stuff. And we'll also let you know when the next episode comes out. And finally, if you didn't know, we have a Facebook group. It's called Code, Tech, and Caffeine. We have over 10,000 members. And you can find the link at selftaughtornot.com. So come join us. We have tons of developers willing to help you guys, mentor you guys. Check it out. Just make sure you go to selftaughtornot.com and check out the Code, Tech, and Caffeine link. Thanks, and take care.